The photo you see on the screen was taken outside Patsy's restaurant in Hollywood on a Tuesday night in March 1962. Peter Lawford stands at a payphone booth, receiver pressed to his ear. But if you look closely at his face, you can see he's not talking to anyone anymore. The line is dead. Frank Sinatra just hung up on him. Look at Peter's eyes. Those are tears. Look at his hand against the glass of the phone booth. It's shaking. And if you look through the restaurant window behind him, you can see Frank Sinatra inside, sitting with Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., laughing. They're celebrating. Celebrating what? Celebrating the fact that they just destroyed Peter Lawford's career, his friendships, and his entire life. This phone call lasted 90 seconds, but those 90 seconds ended a 15-year friendship, killed the Rat Pack, and set Peter Lawford on a path toward alcoholism, bankruptcy, and death at 61 years old. What did Peter do to deserve this? He made one mistake. He was John F. Kennedy's brother-in-law, and when JFK rejected Frank Sinatra, Frank needed someone to punish, someone to blame, someone to blame, someone to destroy. That person was Peter Lawford, and Frank Sinatra destroyed him so completely, so publicly, and so permanently that Peter spent the rest of his life begging for forgiveness that never came. This isn't a story about a falling out between friends. This is a story about how Frank Sinatra weaponized loyalty, used the Rat Pack as a tool of punishment, and systematically annihilated a man's entire existence because he couldn't accept that a president chose someone else. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Peter Lawford's children said, "Frank Sinatra killed our father." Not metaphorically, literally. Let's go back to 1947. Peter Lawford is 24 years old, a rising movie star at MGM. Born in London, raised between England and France, educated in private schools. He's got everything Hollywood wants: the looks, the charm, the accent, and the pedigree. He's not just another actor. He's actual European aristocracy transplanted to California. His mother, Lady May Lawford, was a decorated war hero. His father, Sir Sidney Lawford, was a British military general. Peter grew up in manor houses, attended by servants, educated by tutors. But his family lost their fortune during the Depression, so Peter came to Hollywood to rebuild the family name through movies, and it worked. By 1947, Peter is starring in major MGM productions: Good News with June Allison, Easter Parade with Judy Garland, Little Women with Elizabeth Taylor. He's making $3,000 a week, equivalent to about $40,000 today. He's dating Lana Turner. His face is on magazine covers. His future is unlimited. Frank Sinatra, meanwhile, is 32 years old, and his career is dying. His voice is gone. A vocal hemorrhage in 1950 destroyed his ability to hit high notes. Columbia Records dropped him. His movies are flopping. His marriage to Nancy is falling apart publicly. The press is calling him washed up. He's $150,000 in debt. He's so broke he's borrowing money from friends to pay rent, and he's seriously considering suicide. They meet at a party in Beverly Hills, hosted by Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Peter is there with Lana Turner. Frank is there alone, drinking heavily in a corner, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Peter, who has never experienced career failure, is curious about this broken legend. He walks over. "You're Frank Sinatra," Peter says. "I'm a huge fan of your work." Frank looks up, suspicious. "Which work?" "The stuff from 10 years ago, when people actually liked me. All of it. Even the recent work. I think people don't appreciate what you're doing." Frank studies Peter's face, looking for sarcasm. He doesn't find any. "You're that British kid from MGM, the pretty one." "Peter Lawford. And I'm not British. I just sound like I am." They talk for 3 hours that night, about movies, about music, about the cruelty of Hollywood. Frank is drawn to Peter's sophistication, his education, his access to high society. Peter is drawn to Frank's raw talent, his authenticity, his refusal to pretend everything is fine when it's not. They become friends, not just casual friends, close friends, brothers. Over the next year, Peter introduces Frank to his world: private clubs where only old money is welcome, parties with European aristocrats visiting California, dinners with studio executives who normally wouldn't take Frank's calls. Peter teaches Frank things nobody else could teach him: how to dress for formal events without looking like he's trying too hard, how to navigate conversations with intellectuals and politicians, how to present himself as more than just a singer, as a serious artist worthy of respect. And when Frank's career resurrects in 1953 with From Here to Eternity, when he wins the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, when he goes from washed-up crooner to legitimate movie star, he doesn't forget who was there during the dark years. Peter Lawford was there, and Frank never forgets loyalty. Run au trace. Frank forms the Rat Pack. The original members: Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford. The name comes from Lauren Bacall, who walked into a room after one of their all-night parties and said, "You look like a goddamn Rat Pack." The name stuck, and the Rat Pack becomes the most powerful social group in Hollywood. 5 men, unlimited alcohol, unlimited women, unlimited power. They perform together at the Sands Casino in Las Vegas. They film Ocean's 11 together. They control the nightlife in Los Angeles, Vegas, Miami, and New York. Where they go, everyone follows. And within this group, Peter holds a special position. He's Frank's favorite. Why? Because in 1954, Peter Lawford marries Patricia Kennedy, the sister of Senator John F. Kennedy. Suddenly, Peter isn't just a movie star, he's family to American political royalty. The Kennedys are the most powerful Democratic family in the country. Joe Kennedy Sr., the patriarch, is a former ambassador. JFK is a rising political star, already being discussed as a future presidential candidate. And Frank Sinatra sees opportunity. Frank has always been obsessed with power, not just entertainment power, real power, political power, the power to influence elections, to shape policy, to be more than just a singer. The Kennedys represent everything Frank wants to be close to. Peter becomes Frank's bridge to that world. Every Kennedy family event, Peter brings Frank. Every political fundraiser, Peter arranges Frank's involvement. Every private dinner with JFK, Peter makes sure Frank is invited. The relationship deepens. JFK starts calling Frank directly. They talk about music, about women, about politics. Frank introduces JFK to women, lots of women, including, eventually, Marilyn Monroe. Peter arranges all of it. The meetings, the hotels, the discretion. By 1960, when JFK announces his candidacy for president, Frank is all in. He doesn't just support JFK's campaign, he becomes one of its chief organizers on the entertainment side. Frank produces massive fundraising events. He organizes celebrity endorsements. He records a version of High Hopes as JFK's official campaign song, which plays at every rally. He uses his mob connections to deliver union votes in key states. He spends his own money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, on campaign events, and Peter Lawford orchestrates all of it. Every phone call between Frank and JFK goes through Peter. Every campaign event Frank produces is coordinated with Peter. Every introduction to a political donor or union leader is arranged by Peter. Frank trusts Peter completely, and Peter delivers. Everything Frank asks for, Peter makes happen. November 8, 1960. John F. Kennedy is elected President of the United States, defeating Richard Nixon in one of the closest elections in American history. Frank is at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport when the results come in. He's celebrating with the family. He's already planning what his relationship with the White House will look like. He tells Peter, "We did it. You and me. We put a Kennedy in the White House." Peter smiles. "You did most of it, Frank. I just made the introductions. Don't be modest. You're my guy. You made this happen." For the next year, Frank's relationship with the Kennedys is everything he dreamed it would be. JFK visits Frank in Palm Springs. They party together. Frank has direct access to the President of the United States. When Frank calls the White House, his calls are put through immediately. Peter is the conduit for all of it, and Frank treats Peter like royalty. Whatever Peter needs, Frank provides. Career opportunities, introductions, money, protection. Peter Lawford is untouchable because he's Frank Sinatra's best friend and the president's brother-in-law. But this golden period lasts only 16 months, because in early 1962, everything collapses, and it collapses because of one man who Frank can't control, Robert F. Kennedy. January 1962. President John F. Kennedy announces he's planning a trip to Palm Springs, California, scheduled for late March. The plan, communicated through Peter Lawford, is for the president to stay at Frank Sinatra's compound for the weekend. Frank has been preparing for this moment since the election. He doesn't just want to host the president, he wants to prove that he's worthy of hosting the president, that a kid from Hoboken, New Jersey, can build something impressive enough for the most powerful man in the world to sleep in. So Frank goes all in. He doesn't renovate his house, he rebuilds it. He constructs a massive presidential-grade helipad with professional landing lights, wind indicators, and security infrastructure. He renovates 3 guest cottages on his property, specifically for Secret Service agents, installing secure communication lines, reinforced doors, and surveillance systems. He builds a flagpole to fly the presidential flag. He installs a dedicated secure phone line that connects directly to the White House Situation Room. He hires additional security. He renovates the bathrooms with gold fixtures. He commissions custom furniture. He plants new landscaping. He even builds a separate dining pavilion for state dinners in case the president wants to host foreign dignitaries. Total cost, over $250,000, about $2.5 million in today's money. Frank doesn't care. This is an investment in his legacy. Frank Sinatra, friend of presidents, will be his new identity. Peter Lawford coordinates everything with the White House. He's the liaison between Frank and JFK's staff. He confirms dates. He confirms security arrangements. He confirms, multiple times, that yes, the president will absolutely stay at Frank's house. Frank tells everyone. He's not subtle about it. He brags to reporters, to other celebrities, to random people at parties. "The president is staying at my house in March. We're very close, the president and I." He's sending a message to Hollywood. "I'm not just a singer. I'm a political power player." But while Frank is building his helipad and renovating guest cottages, something is happening in Washington that he doesn't know about. something that will destroy everything. Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General and JFK's younger brother, is waging a war against organized crime. Bobby Kennedy is obsessed with taking down the mob. He's particularly focused on Sam Giancana, the Chicago mob boss who controls gambling, prostitution, and union corruption across the Midwest. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover's direction, has been conducting surveillance on Giancana for years, and in late 1961, they present Bobby Kennedy with evidence that makes him panic. Photographs and wiretap recordings showing Frank Sinatra having regular, ongoing, intimate contact with Sam Giancana and other high-level mobsters. The evidence is damning. Photos of Frank and Giancana at the Calneva Lodge, recordings of phone calls between them discussing business, witness testimony from FBI informants that Frank has been acting as a messenger between the mob and certain politicians. Bobby Kennedy has a problem. His brother, the president, is planning to stay at the house of a man who is currently under FBI investigation for mob connections. If this becomes public, it will destroy JFK's presidency. The administration that promised to fight organized crime can't have its president sleeping in the same bed where mob bosses have slept. Bobby calls Peter Lawford. The date is March 10, 1962, 2 weeks before JFK's scheduled trip. Peter, we have a problem with Frank. What kind of problem? The president can't stay at his house. The FBI has surveillance showing Frank with Giancana, multiple meetings, recent meetings. We're investigating these people, and the president is planning to vacation at their friend's house. You see the problem. Peter's heart sinks. He knows exactly what this means. Bobby, Frank has spent $250,000 preparing for this visit. He's built a helipad. He's told everyone, you can't just cancel. I'm not canceling. The president is still going to Palm Springs. He's just not staying at Frank's house. Then where is he staying? There's a pause. Then Bobby says the words that will destroy Peter's life. Bing Crosby's house. Bing Crosby, Frank's professional rival for 30 years, the crooner Frank has competed with since the 1940s. The man who represents everything Frank hates: effortless success, old money connections, establishment respectability. Bobby, you don't understand. Frank and Bing hate each other. If you do this, Frank will what? Get angry. That's not my problem. My problem is protecting my brother's presidency. Tell Frank the president can't stay with him because of his mob connections. Or don't tell him. I don't care. But the president is not going to that house. Bobby, I'm asking you as family. Is there any way? No. This is final. And Peter, this conversation stays between us. If Frank goes to the press about this, if he causes a scandal, we'll make sure everyone knows exactly why the president couldn't stay with him. Understood? Peter understands. He's trapped. Tell Frank the truth and destroy their friendship. Lie to Frank and destroy their friendship. There's no good option. He chooses the worst option, avoidance. He doesn't call Frank immediately. He waits. Days pass. He's hoping maybe the situation will resolve itself. Maybe Bobby will change his mind. Maybe JFK will override his brother. None of that happens. March 22nd, 4 days before JFK's trip. Peter can't avoid it anymore. He calls Frank. The conversation starts fine. Small talk. Updates on the president's schedule. Then Peter says, Frank, I have some difficult news about the president's visit. Frank's voice changes immediately. What kind of difficult news? There's been a change in plans. The president won't be able to stay at your house. Long silence. Then what do you mean he won't be able to stay at my house? We've had this planned for months. I've built a goddamn helipad. I know. Bobby Kennedy made the decision. It's political. The optics aren't good with your connections. My connections? What connections? Be specific, Peter. Peter hesitates. This is the moment that will define everything. The mob connections. Giancana. The FBI has surveillance. Bobby thinks it's a political liability. Another silence. Then Frank's voice, ice cold. Where is the president staying? Peter knows he shouldn't say it. He should lie. Make up a hotel. Say it's undecided. But he's panicked and exhausted, and he tells the truth. Bing's house. More silence. Then Bing Crosby. Frank, it's not personal. It's just not personal. The president is rejecting me for Bing fucking Crosby. And it's not personal? Bobby made the decision. I tried to change his mind. I tried everything. You're his brother-in-law. You couldn't fix this. Frank, I don't have that kind of influence. Bobby is the Attorney General. When he makes a decision, you're supposed to be my friend. You're supposed to protect me. I tried. Frank, I swear I tried. Not hard enough. Frank hangs up. Peter sits there, phone in his hand, knowing he just lost his best friend. But he doesn't know yet how completely Frank is about to destroy him. March 23rd, the day after the phone call. Frank Sinatra wakes up at 6 a.m., which is unusual for him. He normally sleeps until noon. But today he has work to do. He walks out to the helipad he built. He's carrying a sledgehammer. His security staff watches in confusion as Frank starts swinging. He destroys the landing lights first, glass shattering. Then he attacks the concrete landing pad itself, smashing, cracking. His staff tries to stop him. Mr. Sinatra, please, you're going to hurt yourself. Frank doesn't stop. He swings the sledgehammer for 3 hours, demolishing months of construction. By the time he's done, the helipad is unusable, a crater of broken concrete and shattered glass. His hands are bleeding from blisters. He's drenched in sweat, but the rage isn't gone. It's just getting started. He goes inside, makes 3 phone calls. First to Dean Martin. "Dean, it's Frank. Peter Lawford is out. He's no longer part of the group. Anyone who associates with him is out too." "Understood." Dean, who's been friends with Peter for 10 years, who considers Peter one of his closest friends, hesitates. "Frank, what happened? Can we talk about?" "There's nothing to talk about. Peter betrayed me. He's done. Are you with me or are you with him?" Dean knows what this means. If he chooses Peter, he loses Frank. And losing Frank means losing the Rat Pack, losing Vegas, losing movie deals, losing everything they've built together. "I'm with you, Frank. Always." "Good. Call Peter and tell him." Second call to Sammy Davis Jr. "Sammy, Peter is out. Anyone who talks to him is out. That includes you." Sammy is heartbroken. Peter helped Sammy when he was recovering from his car accident that cost him his eye. Peter defended Sammy when other people in Hollywood discriminated against him. Peter was there when Sammy converted to Judaism and faced backlash. But Sammy also knows that defying Frank means career suicide. "Frank, Peter's my friend. He didn't. I don't care what he did or didn't do. He's out. Are you going to be a problem?" "No, Frank, I'm not a problem." "Then call him. Tell him you can't talk to him anymore. Do it today." Third call to Joey Bishop. "Joey, Peter's done. Spread the word. Anyone in the Rat Pack who talks to Peter Lawford is finished." Joey doesn't even argue. "Consider it done." Within 24 hours, Peter Lawford receives 3 phone calls. Dean calls first. "Peter, I'm sorry. Frank says if I talk to you, I'm out. I can't be out. I have a family. I have a career. I'm sorry." He hangs up before Peter can respond. Sammy calls next. He's crying. "Peter, I love you. You're my brother. But I can't lose Frank. I can't survive in this town without Frank. Please understand. I'm so sorry." He hangs up. Joey doesn't call. He just stops answering Peter's calls entirely. But Frank isn't done. Losing friends is just the beginning. Frank starts calling studio executives. Peter has 4 movies in development at various studios. Frank uses his leverage, and Frank has enormous leverage in 1962 to kill every single project. He calls the head of MGM. "If you cast Peter Lawford, I'll never work with MGM again, and I'll make sure Dean and Sammy don't either." He calls the head of Paramount. "Peter Lawford is poison. Anyone who hires him is making an enemy of me." Within 2 weeks, all 4 of Peter's movie projects are cancelled. His agent calls him, panicking. "Peter, what did you do to Frank? Every studio I contact says they can't touch you. They're terrified of him." Frank calls casino owners in Las Vegas. Peter has 6 headlining shows booked at various casinos over the next year. Frank gets all of them cancelled. The owner of the Sands Casino calls Peter personally. "I'm sorry, Peter. Frank said if we book you, he'll never perform here again. We can't afford that. We're cancelling your contract." The owner of the Flamingo says the same thing. The owner of the Desert Inn says the same thing. 6 shows, all cancelled. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in income gone. But Frank still isn't done. Frank calls gossip columnists. Hedda Hopper, Luella Parsons, Walter Winchell. He plants stories. Peter Lawford is difficult to work with. Peter Lawford has a drinking problem. Peter Lawford is unreliable. The stories start appearing in newspapers across the country. Peter's reputation is being destroyed in print, and there's nothing he can do about it, because the stories are coming from Frank Sinatra, and nobody questions Frank Sinatra. Within 6 weeks of that phone call about JFK, Peter Lawford loses. Hunrunts, his 3 best friends, 4 movie deals worth $800,000, 6 Las Vegas shows worth $500,000, his reputation in Hollywood, his marriage. Over $1 million in income, gone. A 15-year career built on connections and charm, destroyed. All because Bobby Kennedy decided the president couldn't stay at Frank's house. April 17, 1962. 6 weeks after the JFK rejection, Peter Lawford is barely holding on. He's lost everything. His career is in ruins. His wife has moved out and taken the children. His agent stopped returning his calls. He's drinking a bottle of vodka every day just to function. He's having dinner alone at Patsy's restaurant in Hollywood, a place he used to come with the Rat Pack. Now he comes alone, sitting in the back corner, drinking scotch, trying to figure out how to salvage his life. At 8:15 p.m., Dean Martin walks in, with Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra. They don't see Peter at first. They're seated at a large table in the center of the restaurant. Within minutes, the table is full of laughter, champagne, beautiful women. It's like old times, except Peter isn't there. Dean sees Peter first. Their eyes meet across the restaurant. Dean looks away immediately, guilty, ashamed, but not guilty enough to walk over. Peter watches them for 30 minutes, watches Frank tell a story that makes everyone laugh, watches Sammy do an impression, watches Dean light a cigarette and lean back in his chair. chair, completely relaxed. They're having the time of their lives, and Peter is 30 feet away, invisible. At 8:50 p.m., Peter finishes his third scotch and walks outside. There's a payphone on the corner. He has Frank's private number, the number only close friends have. The number Frank gave him 10 years ago with the promise, "You can call me anytime, day or night, for anything." Peter dials. His hands are shaking. The phone rings 4 times. Then Frank's voice. "Yeah, Frank, it's Peter." Long silence. Then, "What do you want?" "I want to talk. I want to explain what happened with JFK." "There's nothing to explain. You chose the Kennedys over me. You chose politics over loyalty. That's not what happened. Bobby made the decision. I had no power to change it. I tried, Frank. I swear to God, I tried. You didn't try hard enough. What was I supposed to do? Defy the Attorney General? Destroy my marriage? Risk my relationship with the President? Yes, if you were really my friend. Yes, you're supposed to protect me. That's what loyalty means. Frank, that's not fair. I was put in an impossible position." "No, you were put in a position where you had to choose, and you chose them." Peter's voice breaks. He's crying now, standing at a payphone on a Hollywood street corner, begging, "Frank, please, you're destroying my life. I can't get work. I can't support my family. My wife left me. The Rat Pack won't talk to me. You've taken everything. Good, maybe you'll learn what it means to betray someone who trusted you. Frank, my kids are asking why Uncle Frank doesn't visit anymore. What am I supposed to tell them? How do I explain this to my children? Tell them their father is a coward who chose politics over friendship. Tell them their father betrayed the man who gave him everything. I didn't betray you. Frank, please, I'm begging you. Just meet with me. Let's talk in person. I'll explain everything. We're done talking. We're done everything. You don't exist to me anymore. Frank." Click. The line goes dead. Frank hung up. Peter stands there, phone receiver in his hand, tears streaming down his face. He can hear the laughter from inside the restaurant. He looks through the window and sees Frank back at the table, smiling, raising a glass in a toast. Dean and Sammy are laughing. They're celebrating something. They're celebrating being rid of him. A photographer walking past notices Peter crying at the payphone, notices Frank through the restaurant window. The contrast is too perfect. He raises his camera and takes the shot. That photograph becomes the defining image of Peter Lawford's fall from grace. Outside in the dark, destroyed. Inside in the light, Frank Sinatra laughing. After that phone call, Peter Lawford's life enters a death spiral. 1962, 1965, his career disintegrates completely. The man who once starred opposite Elizabeth Taylor is now auditioning for guest spots on low-budget television shows. He gets roles like Man at Bar in crime dramas, Waiter 3 in sitcoms, parts with no dialogue, no character names, just background. His agent drops him in 1963. "Peter, I can't sell you anymore. Nobody wants to take the risk." He tries to get work on his own. He shows up to casting calls. Producers recognize him. "Hey, you're Peter Lawford. What are you doing here?" He explains he needs work. They promise to call. They never do. His marriage to Patricia Kennedy ends in divorce in 1966. Pat files, citing Peter's alcoholism, his professional embarrassments, and his inability to support the family. The Kennedy family completely distances themselves from him. He's not invited to family events, not welcome at the compound. When RFK runs for president in 1968, Peter isn't part of the campaign. He's erased from Kennedy family photos. The alcohol consumption becomes catastrophic. Peter is drinking 2 bottles of vodka per day by 1965. His hands shake constantly. He's hospitalized twice for alcohol poisoning. His liver is failing. Doctors tell him he'll die if he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop. His children, Christopher, Sydney, Victoria, and Robin, watch their father disappear into addiction. Christopher later describes it in interviews. "Dad would promise to pick us up for the weekend. We'd wait outside our mother's house. He'd never show up. We'd call him. No answer. Then 3 days later, he'd call, drunk, crying, apologizing." By 1967, Peter is bankrupt. He's lost his house. He's living in a small 1-bedroom apartment in West Hollywood. He's borrowing money from old friends who still take his calls, and there aren't many left. He tries to reconcile with Frank multiple times. He sends letters, handwritten apologies, explanations, begging for a chance to talk in person. Frank never responds. He sends gifts, a watch for Frank's birthday, no response. A bottle of expensive wine for Christmas, no response. A telegram on the anniversary of their first meeting. 15 years of friendship can't end like this. No response. Peter is working, not acting. Working. He's a host at a restaurant in Palm Springs called Melvin's. He seats people at tables, takes reservations, works for minimum wage plus tips. One evening, Frank Sinatra comes in for dinner, with Barbara Marx, his girlfriend. Peter is working the host stand. "Good evening, welcome to Melvin's. Do you have a reservation?" Frank looks at him, no recognition in his eyes, not pretending. Genuine lack of recognition, like Peter is just another restaurant employee. "Sinatra, table for 2. "Of course, Mr. Sinatra, right this way." Peter seats them at a booth. Frank orders a martini. Barbara orders wine. Peter takes their drink, orders to the bar. When he returns with the drinks, his hands are shaking so badly he almost spills them. Frank doesn't notice, or doesn't care. He orders his food, eats his dinner, pays his bill, leaves a 15% tip. Standard. Not generous, not cruel, just standard. Peter goes home that night and drinks until he blacks out. Peter gets a small role in a horror sequel. It's not much, 5 scenes, 3 lines of dialogue, but it's work. Real acting work. For the first time in years, during filming, a journalist interviews him. They talk about his career, the Rat Pack, the old days. Then the journalist asks, "Do you think you'll ever reconcile with Frank Sinatra?" Peter's answer is heartbreaking. "I hope so. I miss him every day. He was more than my best friend. He was my brother. I'd give anything to have that back. I'd give anything for one more conversation where he doesn't hate me." The same journalist asks Frank the same question a week later. "Do you think you'll ever reconcile with Peter Lawford?" Frank's response, "Peter who? Nondra." Peter's son Christopher is getting married. He invites Frank Sinatra to the wedding, not because he expects him to attend, but because Christopher asks him to. "Dad, it's been 20 years. Maybe he's changed. Maybe enough time has passed. Just send him an invitation." Peter sends it, a formal wedding invitation with a handwritten note. "Frank, I know it's been a long time. I know you're angry, but it would mean everything to my son if you were there. Please consider it. Peter." 3 days later, Peter receives a telegram, not a letter. 2 words, "Not interested." Peter frames the telegram, hangs it in his apartment. His daughter Sydney visits and sees it on the wall. "Dad, why would you hang something so cruel?" Peter's answer destroys her, "Because it's the only communication I've had from him in 20 years. At least he acknowledged I exist." December 24th, 1984, Christmas Eve. Peter Lawford dies at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He's 61 years old. The official cause, cardiac arrest caused by kidney and liver failure. The real cause, decades of alcoholism destroyed his organs. He dies nearly broke. His estate is worth less than $1,000. His children have to crowdfund his funeral. The man who once lived in a mansion, who partied with presidents, who was Hollywood royalty, dies with almost nothing. His funeral is held 2 days later at Westwood Memorial Park. About 50 people attend. Dean Martin is invited. He sends flowers but doesn't come. Sammy Davis Jr. is invited. He's performing in Las Vegas and can't make it. Joey Bishop is invited. He's unavailable. Frank Sinatra is invited. He doesn't respond. During the eulogy, Peter's son Christopher says something that makes headlines. "Frank Sinatra killed my father. Not with his hands, not with a gun, but with cruelty, with rejection, with 22 years of silence. My father spent 2 decades trying to earn back Frank's friendship. He died still trying, and Frank never gave him a chance." The press asks Frank for a comment. Frank's publicist releases a statement. Mr. Sinatra has no comment on Mr. Lawford's passing. No condolences, no acknowledgement of their 15-year friendship, no humanity, just no comment. 3 years later, in 1987, Frank is interviewed by Barbara Walters. She brings up Peter Lawford. "Do you regret how things ended with Peter?" Frank doesn't hesitate. "No, Peter made his choice. He chose the Kennedys over me. Actions have consequences. But he's dead now, Frank. He died broke and alone. Do you wish you'd reconciled before he passed?" "I don't spend time wishing about things that didn't happen. His children have said publicly that you destroyed their father. How does that make you feel?" "It doesn't make me feel anything. Peter destroyed himself. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of his choices. No remorse, no second guessing, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he was too cruel." Frank Sinatra goes to his grave believing he was right to destroy Peter Lawford. And maybe that's the saddest part of this story. Peter spent 22 years begging for forgiveness, and Frank spent 22 years believing there was nothing to forgive. So here's the question we have to ask. Was Frank Sinatra justified in destroying Peter Lawford? Let's look at the facts. Peter Lawford was JFK's brother-in-law. When Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, said the president couldn't stay at Frank's house due to FBI surveillance of Frank's mob connections, what was Peter supposed to do? Option 1. Defy Bobby Kennedy, risk his relationship with the Kennedy family, potentially destroy his marriage, and still probably not change the outcome. Option 2. Accept Bobby's decision and hope Frank understands that Peter had no control over it. Peter chose option 2, and Frank punished him for 22 years. Frank's argument was simple. Real friends protect each other. Real friends fight for each other. Peter should have fought harder. Peter should have used his Kennedy connections to override Bobby's decision. But that's insane. Peter didn't have the power to override the Attorney General of the United States. Peter wasn't a political insider. He was an actor married to JFK's sister. He had no leverage over Bobby Kennedy. None. Some people defend Frank. They say loyalty is everything. When you're Frank's friend, you're supposed to be loyal above all else. And Peter wasn't loyal. He prioritized his family over Frank. But others argue that Frank's version of loyalty was toxic. It wasn't loyalty, it was obedience. Frank demanded absolute control over his friends' lives. If you couldn't protect him from consequences, if you couldn't fix problems he created, you were disloyal, and disloyalty meant destruction. The truth is probably this: Frank Sinatra needed someone to blame for JFK's rejection. He couldn't punish the president. He couldn't punish Bobby Kennedy. He couldn't punish the FBI. So he punished Peter Lawford, the only person in the situation he had power over. And he didn't just punish him, he annihilated him, systematically, publicly, permanently, for 22 years, until Peter died begging for forgiveness that never came. Frank Sinatra built his entire identity around loyalty. He preached it constantly: you're either loyal to me, or you're nothing. The Rat Pack was built on loyalty. His friendships were built on loyalty. His business relationships were built on loyalty. But Frank's version of loyalty was one-directional. You had to be loyal to him, absolutely, without question, without compromise. But Frank didn't have to be loyal to you. Frank could abandon you for any perceived betrayal, no matter how small, no matter how justified. Peter Lawford was loyal to Frank for 15 years. He introduced him to the Kennedys. He arranged political connections that helped Frank feel powerful. He elevated Frank's status from entertainer to political insider. He was there during Frank's darkest career moments in the early 1950s. But the moment Peter couldn't protect Frank from political reality, the reality that a president can't stay at the house of someone under FBI investigation for mob ties, Frank erased him. And the cruelest part, Frank could have forgiven him at any time. Peter was begging for forgiveness, sending letters, showing up at restaurants, calling. For 22 years, Frank had thousands of opportunities to show mercy, to show humanity, to acknowledge that maybe Peter was put in an impossible situation. Frank chose cruelty every single time. That photo from outside Patsy's restaurant, Peter crying at the payphone while Frank laughs inside 30 feet away, that's the real Frank Sinatra. Not the legend, not the chairman of the board, not the mythological figure, the real man, the man who would destroy a friend's entire life, career, and family over a decision that friend didn't even make. Peter Lawford died, broke, alcoholic, alone, and desperate for forgiveness that never came. His children grew up watching their father beg for mercy from a man who had none to give. And Frank never expressed regret. Not once, not in interviews, not in his autobiography, not in his private conversations, not in his will. He took the cruelty to his grave, believing until his last breath that he was right, and Peter deserved everything he got. So was Frank justified? That's for you to decide. But remember this: Peter Lawford made one mistake in an impossible situation, and Frank Sinatra made him pay for it for the rest of his life. That's not loyalty, that's tyranny. And tyranny dressed up as loyalty is still tyranny. If this story disturbed you, subscribe to Frank Sinatra, The Untold Legacy. We're not here to protect legends, we're here to expose the truth, even when the truth reveals cruelty that lasted decades. Hit the notification bell. Next week, Frank Sinatra and Sam Giancana, the mob friendship that destroyed everything. Comment below. Was Frank justified? Or was this the cruelest thing he ever did? Let's have an honest conversation about where loyalty ends and abuse begins. Share this with someone who needs to understand that loyalty without compassion is just control. Thank you for watching. The truth is uncomfortable, but silence is worse.